Hey, hey. All right, everybody. Thank you. I need to close. I need to just to shut down the window on my side because otherwise it shows me like a delayed version, and it's really hard to talk at the same time. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the February, already February. Wow, um, February 2024 meeting of the Grand Strand Astronomers. So we have a great presentation tonight. We've got Jonathan Ward up there, and at least in my, he's up in the upper left-hand corner of my screen. From Greensboro, North Carolina. And he's going to talk to us about preparing for Messier Marathon and also how he did a photographic Messier Marathon, which I think is pretty interesting. Um, so before we have Jonathan tell us a little bit about himself and get started, just a couple of things before we get started. First is I want to remind everybody about our next viewing session on Saturday, March the 10th. So that's actually a special viewing session because the SC DNR, I guess, or what was the DNR, and I'm not sure it's DNR anymore, whatever the organization is, we'll be bringing a bunch of people down to Hampton State Park for that event. So if the conditions are even like halfway good, we're gonna need to get some telescopes out there to support everybody. So I'd appreciate the help if that comes to pass. I'm hoping it's really good weather, right? Also, we're gonna try to do a Messier marathon there if the weather's good, but we'll see. That's why Jonathan's presentation is very timely, right? Um, so if the weather's good, we'll do that. But even if the weather's only so-so, we do need to get some telescopes out there to because the SC, we want the state parks people and everything to kind of see how supportive we are, and so we can keep using the site and hopefully move all that forward. So I know the Low Country Stargazers also is aware of that. Dimitri is aware of that. So we'll have everybody out there. Let's see. The next thing I wanted to mention was our next meeting is near the end of March, but you can see that on the website. Also, Tom, I think wanted to talk a little bit about. I guess is it Dark Sky Month, or I'll let you. Let me. You're on mute, sir.
I apologize about that. Starting April 2nd through April 8th is what they call it's International Dark Sky Week. Here for myself down here in Charleston, I'm going to be getting up with Low Country Stargazers. We're going to be at Johns Island County Park to kick that off. Hopefully, get some interviews. Want to bring more attention to these horrible blue lights that they're installing, these bright LEDs to try to get like some Ian's got in his neighborhood. So I just wanted to mention that to anybody. And if you like to, you can check it out at darkskies.org. And as of last March, the name went from International Dark Sky Association. It's now Dark Skies International. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, just to mention that if you're a Santee Cooper customer, they ran a pilot project in our neighborhood where they replaced all the lights with 3000 Kelvin lights that were also much dimmer than the previous ones were like incredibly blasting out a lot of light, right? So it went to much dimmer, and it's everybody seems to be really happy. All the residents seem to be really happy with it. And so hopefully we'll be able to get some other neighborhoods to pressure them to also change out their bulbs, right? Um, so hopefully that's the start of a trend, right? I got to warn you, if you try to get it done, there is some resistance from Santee Cooper. So, but it is possible. So hopefully we can get people more aware of that. So. All right. Does anybody have any other announcements for the group before we turn it over to the amazing Jonathan here? Oh, okay, Jonathan, I'm going to I'll let you introduce yourself and talk about some of the cool stuff you've done and that you do. And I'll stop talking. How's that?
Okay, let me share my screen then. So hopefully you all can see my my title screen here now. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. That says March Madness Photographic Messier Marathon. Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. My name's Jonathan. I'm an astronomer, an amateur astronomer in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm a member of or a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, and I'm a JPL Solar System ambassador. So I get a chance to do a lot of talking about astronomy, and especially the last couple of years, I've been a speaker on cruise ships as a resident astronomer for Viking, and then also as a astronomy lecturer for a couple of other cruise lines. I've been having a lot of fun doing that. I'm also the let's see here. This is not advancing. Let me get to that. Okay. This okay. You guys still all see the main screen, right? Okay. Uh, um, I've been very fortunate to let's see, also be the author of 4 books about space exploration, and for some reason this is not. Here we go. Yeah, 2 of them about the Apollo program, and one about the aftermath of the Space Shuttle Columbia accident, and then working with Eileen Collins, the first woman to command a space mission, on her autobiography. And so that's been what's been keeping me busy for the last couple of years, in addition to the cruise ship speaking. And I come to astronomy honestly. This was me at the March 7th, 1970 solar eclipse with my little 4.5-inch Tasco, and still continue today. This is the setup that I use for my photographic Messier marathon, which I'll be talking about this evening. This is the setup I got about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. It's a 127 millimeter Explore Scientific refractor, and a EQ6R Pro mount, and a color ASI color camera. And this is what I wanted to learn how to use, having come from a visual background, and also then using a DSLR with a telescope. I wanted to learn how to use my new equipment, and so I like to set myself what I call stupid astronomer tricks, or stupid astronomer challenges. And here is one of them. For an example, was I was curious as to whether, if I imaged at the beginning of a session, if I imaged where Pluto was in the sky first thing in the evening, and then went out and looked at that same spot 4 hours later, would it have moved far enough in the evening for me to be able to notice that movement with my modest astrophotography gear? And I just went out and tried this again. This was with my 127 millimeter refractor, and taking just a few exposures at each end of my session. And lo and behold, I was actually able to, well, let's see, for some reason my animation's not working here. I'm going to pop out of my presentation and go back into it again here and see if I can get it restarted, because it doesn't seem to be wanting to cooperate. My computer is acting up now. How about that? I blame your computer. That's what's going on, right? For some reason.
Yeah, I infected it. Yeah.
Let me let me try sharing again here. I'm not sure what's going on here.
You might want to try share the entire screen rather than just the application, because
Okay.
sometimes that acts weird on Zoom.
Okay. I was trying share screen. Actually, what's happening is I think it's trying to play through another monitor here, and that's what's probably doing it. Let me try this. My apologies for this, guys.
No worries.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's play from current slide. Okay. There we go. Now you can see Pluto moving.
Yes, we can.
Which I thought was kind of cool. This was just over the course of 4 hours. You could actually see Pluto moving in your with modest backyard equipment. And so I haven't gone through and tried to figure out how much of that was due to Earth's movement and Earth's rotation and all this other stuff. I was just happy enough to be able to do that. That's the kind of thing I like to do as a way to learn how to use the equipment, and just to try things out, which I think are kind of interesting above and beyond taking pictures of the Orion Nebula. And so, I thought it was cool to be able to look at this star field here and realize that I'm actually looking, in this picture here at that planet that far, or I still call it a planet that far away, billions of miles away, that you could capture something like that with your backyard telescope is never ceases to amaze me. So get to the Messier Marathon. One of the things that I wanted to do when I started with this equipment was to try to do a Messier, or at least to see as many of the Messier objects as I could in the course of a year. And I never got to see as many of them as I'd like to. I probably had less than 50 of them in my catalog that I'd actually seen. And this is for those, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. He had 110 objects in the official Messier list, and I'd seen less than half of them. And so I thought, it would be interesting to try to see them. The official way to run a Messier marathon, of course, is that you don't use any computer control. You do everything by using your finder scope and things like that. And my eyes are old and bad enough now that I think I'd have a hard time with that. But I thought maybe this would be an interesting way to see if it's possible to see them all in one night in a 24-hour period. It's theoretically possible the last 2 weeks of March and the first week of April, if you're in mid latitudes and that you don't have a whole lot of moonlight, and if you have clear horizons and a dark site, all of these things make it theoretically possible to be able to see it. So we live in the right latitude here. I was looking for a time. This was in 2019 when I was still learning to use my equipment. Looking for a time in March when there was going to be predicted to be good weather for a night, and at a time when it wasn't full moon. And so I did find that it looked like the last week of March was going to be a good one for me. And I thought, well, this would be really interesting. I wonder if it's possible to image all of these in one night. If you could definitely see them, but could you actually take meaningful photographs of them in the course of one evening? And so, here's the layout of the Messier objects. And again, it's working your way across the sky to try to see them all. At this time in late March or in October, you're able to catch all of them during the course of the evening, except for a couple that are just above the horizon at sunset, and some that are just rising at dawn. Messier 30 in Capricorn, for example, is just starting to come up in the morning twilight in late March. So it's a real a tough one for people to see. So I found this Messier Marathon field guide. I looked up a number of different books about how to do this kind of thing. Don Mackholtz, of course, was the master of doing the Messier marathons. Again, I didn't figure I was going to be able to do this visually or without the aid of my computer controlled telescope, but I wanted to give it a shot here and see if I could what I could do to try to make it work, and set this up as a challenge for myself. How do you go about figuring out how to do this? So if you got 110 objects, at the earliest I could start on the night that it looked like it was going to be clear, the sunset was going to be at about 7:30, twilight would end at 8:30. So if I could start at 8:30 and then sunrise was going to be at 7:15, if I could finish all the targets by 6 o'clock in the morning, that gave me 9.5 hours for imaging. That's 570 minutes. I divided that by 109 targets, came out to a little over 5 minutes per target, which would include the time both to image that object and then to be able to move the telescope to the next object. So what I needed to do, to maximize the amount of time I could spend imaging, I was trying to figure out ways I could reduce this overhead of trying to find a target, lock onto it, and start taking pictures. And so I thought, okay, well, if I do vacation pictures, which are basically just good enough using a one-shot color camera that didn't require filter changing, and if I took short exposures, like between 10 and 30 seconds, I wouldn't have to guide. I wouldn't have to worry about having precise polar alignment. And if I could minimize the amount of time that I moved between objects, we're lucky there's a couple of places like with M31, M32, and M110, they're all in the same field of view. M81, M82, the same field of view. So this also gave me a little bit of cheat time because I could take two objects at one time. There were about 15 that you can do that way. And so I also thought if I kind of worked within neighborhoods, This was like finding areas where the objects are clustered around together, and then also tried to eliminate the amount of time that I would spend if the telescope had to flip across the meridian. I really didn't want to do that more than once if I could help doing that. I was using at this time, I was using Sequence Generator Pro. I had not started using Nina. And so I was using kind of clunky software compared to what I'm using now. But I thought if I could just slew to an object rather than trying to be precisely centered on it, that would be good enough. As long as I could get the object somewhere within the frame, I was going to be happy with that. So, I didn't care if it was within 100 pixels of the center of the frame, it was not going to bother me, as opposed to if I was trying to take a 6-hour long set of exposures of one object where I wanted to be pretty precisely lined up. So this gave me a little bit of leave room. I could be a little bit sloppy in how I went about moving from target to target. So, and then I was going to use Sequence Generator Pro to automate the imaging process. So what I was going to do was then load all of these targets in order into Sequence Generator Pro and have it take the number of images that I needed to take and then move on to the next object. I also wanted to get rid of the other part of overhead was that the plate solving software I had in Sequence Generator Pro was it was astrometry.net, and it was pretty slow. It's not nearly as fast as ASTOP, which is in Nina, but I would frequently spend 2 or 3 minutes trying to plate solve with that. So I really wanted to eliminate plate solving wherever I could, just to cut down on overhead. So the strategy, this is the same way you do a visual marathon. Start right after sunset with the objects that are far off to the west before they set in the sun. So you work your way from west to south, you work your way from west to east, and then south to north, because the objects that are farther north are going to stay up higher as well. Rather than trying to load all 110 objects into Sequence Generator Pro, I broke it up into 6 groups. And so this was on average of about 20 to 25 objects per group. And the reason I did that was, one, because I didn't want to risk something happening with the software. I didn't know if Sequence Generator Pro could handle 110 targets in the course of an evening. I thought 25 was one that it probably could do. Also, I wanted to make sure that I gave myself time between these groups. So between every group of objects of 20 or 25 objects, I would refocus and I would plate solve at the start of each group to make sure I was back on track and my telescope was precisely where I needed it to be, and that the focusing was good. I was just manually focusing with a Botanoff mask. I didn't have an automatic focuser at the time, so I didn't have to worry. That was another thing that probably would have added to the overhead, would be refocusing with the automatic focuser. So again, giving myself 5 minutes per target, I figured I'd get 3 minutes of integration time, 3 minutes of time taking the pictures, and that I would use either 10 seconds or 30-second sub-exposures depending on how bright the sky was. I didn't want to risk washing out the images right after sunset. I was still going to be imaging when there was some twilight going on because of the objects that were setting in the twilight. And so I was allowing myself then 2 minutes of overhead to slew between the objects and frame and make sure the mount had settled before I started taking the images. I printed out the list exactly in the order that I was going to go. And I had the estimated time that I was going to start each object. And I made sure that I had this log in front of me so that I was manually checking off every object as I went. If I had to skip something for a reason, I would highlight it and make sure I went back to it before I went on to the next group of objects. Plate solving, I would only do after I had moved a long way, or if I had to meridian flip, or for some reason I couldn't find the target, then I would go to plate solve as a last resort. And so, and then rather than trying to manage every minute of this, I thought I would manage it by groups. If I start group 2 by 10 o'clock at night, if I start group 3 by midnight, et cetera, that would be a way to allow myself a little bit of extra time. If I had trouble with one target, I could go back to it again. And then I gave myself 15 minutes for catch-up between each group. And catch-up time would be to go back and pick things that I had missed, or again, focus, go get myself a cup of coffee, things like that. So I wanted to make sure I had that extra slop time built in, just in case things didn't go the way I expected them to go. So this was the way that I set up my groups. I had 26 in the first group that was going to be going between 8:30 and about 10:30 at night. Then I would use again 10-second subs for the ones on the western horizons, and then later on 30-second. Then I would move to the Leo Ursa Major and Coma area for a little over an hour and a half, and then go to the Virgo galaxies after midnight. The meridian flipping was going to be somewhere around this time. When I got to Virgo, that's where I was going to have to flip the meridian. This was again in March. Then moved to the Lyra, Hercules, other objects between 1 and 3:30. Get to Scorpius and Sagittarius and all those objects late in the morning. And then finally, there's a few stragglers that I would pick up between 5:20 and 6 o'clock in the morning. And then I had to wait. The last one to come up would be M30, which was a completely separate thing. I would hope to have all of the other ones done and then wait for M30 to rise. A lot of people give up on M30. They don't even bother with it because it's so hard to see when it's coming up in the sunrise. But I thought I might as well give it a shot anyway, just in case.
Yeah, that's
Anyway,
what happened to me when I did it visually. I tried real hard on M30, and I just kept trying to stare, and it's like,
yeah, it is a tough one. So this is what the map of my groups looked like. So this is the way things kind of broke down. Again, this is just roughly an equal division of the number of targets between things here. You can see the one between 122 and 305. There was a lot of going north and south and things like that, but otherwise they stayed pretty well within nice groups with each other. The one thing I was really concerned about was the moon. Again, it was a clear night, but the moon was going to be just past. The moon was going to be still not quite down to third quarter, and there were 13 objects that were within 2 degrees of the moon. So I was not confident of how these things were going to look. The moon was here. This was down in the Sagittarius area. So there were a lot of globular clusters down in the area and some nebulas down in the area where the moon was going to be. So here's my equipment again, the Explore Scientific. I had the ASI 294 color cam, EQ6R Pro mount. I had a laptop running this, and I was using I used my Prius as a power source. I have an inverter attached to the startup battery, the starter battery, and I just run power from that. Final preparations, and make sure I had. I can't tell you how many times I checked each sequence to make sure that it all added up to 110 objects. I made sure my batteries were all charged, my phone was charged. I printed out a couple of checklists with the targets and times on them, made sure I had plenty of hard drive space available for me, made myself a pot of coffee, got warm clothes, toe warmers, got my Atlas logbook, etc. And then the day of the marathon, Tuesday, March 26, 2019, I had food poisoning at 3 o'clock in the morning the night before, and I was up for several hours being sick from that. Luckily, got better by the time the day went on. Later on in the afternoon, checked the weather forecast and make sure everything looked good. The wind was great, no clouds, transparency was good, low humidity, temperature was reasonable. There's a Bortle 4 to 5 site. It's a farm that my wife's cousin has north of Greensboro that I was going to go to. And so that was where I was going to go off. And I got out there at 6:45, found a good spot on the farm. And what I did was to lay out the azimuth lines of where I was going to look. This is the east horizon from where I was setting up. M30 was going to be rising. I tried to find a spot where M30 would be rising right between this gap and the trees at 6:15 in the morning. Where that crosshairs is, it would be 4 degrees above the horizon at 6:15. This is while dawn was still actively in progress. The south horizon was really nice and clear, beautiful place to be able to see Sagittarius and Scorpius just fine. For the west horizon here, I was looking at where M77 and M74 were going to be. These are the two really tough ones, those and M33. And so, I knew where the things low in the west were going to be right after sunset. So again, just wanted to make sure my sight lines looked good. The trees weren't going to be in the way when the sun set. So terminal countdown, set up my scope. The sunset, just as scheduled. I found Sirius and focused the scope. I had forgotten to do a polar alignment, and it turned out I was about 5 degrees off with my polar alignment. So I came back to Polaris and polar aligned. I was getting nervous already at this point. And then double checked. I did a 2-star alignment on Sirius and Capella to make sure everything looked good. And then one of the things that I had read for a recommendation for starting a photographic marathon was to actually start on M45, even though the Pleiades, even though they were not down on the horizon, you could find them while the twilight was still in progress, and so you could get a photograph of the Pleiades, plate solve on those, and be ready to go. So instead of starting at 8:30, I was actually starting at 8:20 with the Pleiades. And so what I'll do is just kind of like walk you through the images as they went along. So here's the Pleiades, the first one I got. Not a spectacular picture, but again, this was taken in twilight. First object down. M77, I could barely see it on the computer screen. So again, we're looking at 10-second subs that are coming through here. And this is 3 minutes of integration time pulled together. You can make out the galaxy on here now. I could see that it was kind of a fuzzy spot, and I recognized the star near the galaxy from there had been a supernova there the previous year, and so I recognized the galaxy. When I got to M74, I was a lot less clear about that. It was, I could see what looked like an out of focus star on the screen. Again, you can just barely make out the galaxy in this image here. This was the one I was not 100% sure I had gotten M74, and I made note of the star positions and things to check out when I got back home again. It was starting to get darker now by the time I got to M33, so that one's pretty clear that I could get M33, and then I was off and running at this point. So at this point, I'd already gotten 4 of them down by 8:30, which is when I wanted to start. So I was already kind of working ahead of schedule. Got Andromeda. Now again, I didn't bother trying to rotate and get these things framed properly. I've got M31, M32, and M110 in the field of view here, so I'm up to 7, and I just started working my way along through the processor. I got M52, and it managed to even get the little bubble nebula nearby here. Not too bad for 3 minutes of integration time. They're not super pictures, but you can see that I definitely had the images in sight here. Here's the little dumbbell nebula. At this point now, it had finally gotten dark, 8:51. A lot of these open clusters I had maybe seen before, but I didn't recognize them right away. And so one of the things that I started doing was to consult my phone whenever I went to an open cluster and look at the Wikipedia entry for the open cluster that it was in question, to make sure I was looking at the right part of the sky. So yeah, everything is going along pretty nicely here. M35 was pretty, M37. So now I've been at it for an hour, and I've already got 19 objects under my belt, or 18 sure, 1 questionable. M38, M41, M93. So everything is chugging along pretty good here in this first thing. And then I got to M50, and my telescope took this picture, and I said, I don't see an open cluster here. And again, I looked. This is when I decided to start using my phone to try to check things out. So I said, I definitely don't see M50 there. I'm gonna skip over it and come back to it, because I was already running ahead of schedule. So I went to M48. And then for some reason, the telescope went right back to M50 just fine when I slewed back to it. I have no idea why it was more than a degree off the first time I tried going there. But that was the way my astrophotography used to go. The first couple of years I had the scope, I would always seem to be a little off and never quite as well aligned as I am now that I've gotten more time experimenting with things. So I finished up the first group at 10 o'clock, and I was already at this point half an hour ahead, actually 50 minutes ahead of schedule at this point. So things were going really, really well. And I was starting to feel pretty good about myself. I got 26 objects down ahead of schedule. And so what I decided to do was, since it was working so well, instead of doing 3 minutes of integration, I would do 4 minutes of integration on each thing. So I went from doing 6 30-second subs to 8 30-second subs for the next group. So I started off with with the beehive, worked through a couple clusters. When I got to the Leo triplet, when I slew, this is where I had to do a meridian flip, was to get over to the Leo triplet, because this was now on the east side of the meridian. And for some reason, the slew to M95 was way off. I had shot a couple of frames and then realized the galaxy was nowhere to be seen in there. And so I had to do a plate solve and recenter. And I was, for some reason, more than 5 degrees off when I did the meridian flip. But I got M95 back in, then got the rest of the Leo triplet, and just started again working my way through, seeing some familiar faces like Bode's Galaxy here, or the Owl Nebula, and working my way along some beautiful galaxies. And I thought they came out pretty well. I also went to Messier's mistakes. This was M40, which is a double star, one of Messier's mistakes. But I wanted to go ahead and just faithfully catalog it as I went through. A lot of these galaxies you'll recognize, the sunflower galaxy. The whirlpool looks great. Again, for 4 minutes of exposure time, I was really happy with the way things were looking. And so everything just chugged along pretty nicely after that meridian flip. The scope behaved itself very, very well until I got to, let's see here, just keep moving along. Yeah. So the second group was good. By the time I finished the second group, I was still more than half an hour ahead of schedule. And so, again, feeling pretty good about things. At this point, I had 48 objects under my belt. And so, and I hadn't even gotten quite to midnight yet. So feeling pretty good about things. And now I was going to go on to doing some of the galaxies. And so this was going to be a little bit more challenging because a lot of these look very similar. And I wanted to make sure I was looking at the right ones. So again, it was pulling out my Wikipedia and just double checking that I had the correct galaxies as I worked my way through the Virgo and Coma area. Let's see if I have any. If I see any notes here, if you want me to stop on anything, just holler. But you'll just see here that I'm clicking along and getting them in there. Let's see. For some reason, I had some real issues when I moved from M61. Let's see, M49. When I went over to get from M49 to M104, you'll see here that I lost 15 minutes. For some reason, my telescope would not go to the Sombrero Galaxy. It would just refuse to move there. And I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Every time I would, tell it to, even plate solving, it wouldn't get there. And I was starting to get a little bit of panicky. I thought I couldn't clear the alignment data in my mount. And I was starting to think I was going to have to power everything down and restart again, which I really, really did not want to do. I thought that would probably be the death knell if I had to restart it. But for some reason, after the third or fourth attempt, it finally found the Sombrero Galaxy. And I breathed a sigh of relief and soldiered on. Let's see what happened here. Yeah, we had, M91. Okay, and so now I've gotten 66 of them out of the way by 1:20 in the morning. Again, feeling pretty good about things, and starting to move on to the next sequence now. These are objects that are starting to rise. They were farther off in the eastern horizon. Now I'd worked my way across the sky, and now we're working my way to the east. Some of these, M5 was beautiful, spectacular as always, as was M13. Let's see. Making some notes to myself here. The Ring Nebula was pretty. M56, this lovely little globular cluster in Lyra. I just remember thinking, Lyra is this tiny little cluster, a tiny little constellation, and it has this tiny little globular cluster. Just after having seen M5 and M13, how tiny this one looked by comparison. I don't think I'd ever looked at M56 before in my telescope. By the time now because I was so far ahead of schedule, when I got down to M29 and Cygnus, you can see here I was in the trees. This hadn't come high enough up above the horizon for me to image it. So even though I can make out the cluster there, I didn't want to count this as a win. So I circled this one as one that I needed to come back to. And actually, the next three targets I wanted to go to, M39, M27, and M71, were all in the trees. So I had four that I would have to come back to after they'd had a chance to rise for a little while. So continue to work my way through globulars. Now I've gone back now at this point now by about 20 minutes later, M29 had come high enough above the trees that I was able to get it. And then the other ones that had also been in the trees were coming through. When I moved down to the south to get M9, you can see some weird banding here. This is because M9 was close to the moon. As I mentioned, the moon was the moon had just started to rise at this point, and there were 13 objects that were a couple of degrees away from the moon. So I was definitely starting to get some moonstruck images here. Let's see. Yeah, still lots of stuff in the trees, but I finally did manage to get things. This is what the moon was starting to do to some of these objects as I was getting closer to them, and so I was going to have to. These are the kind of gradients you can't remove in processing very well. So I was trying to move the scope around in such a way that the dew shield at least kind of minimized the reflection. But I had the dew shield extended, and I was still getting this because the moon was pretty bright and very close to these objects. M4 came through nicely, M80. So I'm now working my way to the south. So I felt like this part of the marathon was pretty inefficient. I was skipping all over the sky at this point, just picking things off. I'm not quite sure why I did things in the order I did. I think I had looked at them. This was an order that Don Mackholtz had put in his visual way of looking for the doing the Messier marathon. I'm not sure I would, if I was doing this photographically again, if I would go back and do it in the same order. But nonetheless, things seem to be working pretty well here as I worked along from object to object. M6 was in the trees again. Now I'm looking down in the far south of Scorpius, and so I really had to wait a while for this to come up. Even though I had a pretty low horizon to the south, it still was pretty wicked off to the southeast. Finally got to took a little bit of time off, got to group 5 here. This was kind of like the Scorpius Sagittarius area, and so just started working my way through here. There's the Eagle Nebula, the Omega Nebula, M18. This was another one of Messier's mistakes, M24. This is a Sagittarius star cloud. The first time I tried imaging this, again, this was close to where the moon is, and I had moonlight all over the place, but I was finally able to get back to the coordinates that Messier had given it and be able to get an image of what he had mistakenly called a cluster. M25, M23. When I tried to do the Trifid Nebula, this is what I got. I thought I've saved this picture because I just think this is a really cool image here. But M21 is that cluster that's at the top center, but you can't see the Trifid Nebula in here at all. Well, I guess I can just barely make it out. I know where to look for it, but obviously this was not something I could count as having gotten the Trifid Nebula in place. So I maneuvered the scope around using my game controller to get M21 into the frame where I could at least minimize the amount of moonlight on it, and then went over to the Lagoon Nebula, and then came back to the Trifid Nebula again. Again, trying to maneuver the scope around so that I minimize the amount of moonlight striking it. There's still a lot of a gradient in there, and this is after I've gone through and removed the gradients with processing software with PixInsight. but you can make out the nebula a lot more clearly now. And you can see now I'm up to 96 objects, and I just couldn't believe I was cruising along so well. Um, Lots of little globular clusters. Most of these I had never seen before, except for M22 is one a lot of us have seen. Um, and now M6 was out of the trees. I could get that as well as M7. Uh, this little tiny guy working my way along through the southern part of Sagittarius. And finally got down to, okay, group 6. And I was taking a deep breath because this is the final few objects that I was going to need to get. I'd gotten 103 objects at this point, were 102 for sure, and then 100 and then one questionable. So again, a lot of the things that I wanted to go for here were still in the trees. So I had to actually, because I'd been so far ahead, had to give myself a little bit of leeway time to let these things rise. But I got M75, M15, M2 was in the trees. Give it time to come back up again. M72. This little asterism, this is another one of Messier's mistakes, M73. But now 107 of these down with 3 left to go. When I looked back to the south to try to get the last couple ones, this one is M55, and you can see this line going across there. There was one phone pole that was in the field where I was, and of course, it just happened to be right dead center in Scorpius and Sagittarius when I was trying to image down in that area. So I got this image of the guy wire, and I thought that didn't really count either. So I would come back to M55 later on. Went back to M2 now that it had risen some, came back to M55, and then finally now we're down to 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm waiting on M30. And so the question was, how do I do this? What's the best way to do this? I'm going to plate solve on something. So I'm not sure what it was, but I went over near where Capricornus was. It was going to be another 15 minutes or so before M30 would start rising. So what I did was I decided to set Sequence Generator Pro just to take 200 10-second subs right at the time that M30 was supposed to start rising, and hoping that I would catch it in one of those frames, because again, dawn was just about to start breaking at this point. So this was the sequence of frames here, and supposedly M30 was in the center of this. And I realized to my horror that even though I had picked out the sight line very carefully, I realized my scope when I was unpacking everything was on a little slant. So I moved it 10 feet farther south, and that was enough to put M30 into where the trees were. And so I was really hoping that it's somewhere in here that M30 would have come back through this. So I was thinking this is about where M30 was going to be, and so you can see a little bit of fuzz there where that cursor is, and I didn't really want to call this M30, but I figured maybe I'd be able to go back with all of those frames that I got, that maybe I could pull something out of that later on. But anyway, at this point now, dawn had broken. And actually, I'll go back and show this frame again here as we start this. Well, anyway, yeah, it just as you'll see how much the sky brightened as I started moving along here. I get this to run. Yeah, well, anyway, you can see, yeah, but so there was no trying to find M30 at this point after the sky had gotten that bright. So packed it up and headed home. I know I had at least 108 of the objects. I'd actually, when I started the night off, I figured if I could get 75 of them, I'd be happy. If I could get 100, I'd be ecstatic. But at this point now, I knew I had 108, and I had 2 questionable ones. So as I was unpacking or packing things up, I realized I'd forgotten to plug in the camera cooler. Again, in my nervousness to get started, this was a cooled camera. I hadn't plugged in the camera cooler. I probably could have gotten slightly better images, but it's too late to change it now. Got home at 7:30 in the morning, and first thing I wanted to do, of course, was to check my subs to see if I'd actually caught M74 and M30, and then tried to decipher my scribbling from a night's worth of taking notes in the dark. So I ended up with almost 1,700 raw images out of for those objects, 40 gigabytes of data. I'm glad I cleared off the 40 gigs of hard drive space. I had two computers processing these things, just so I could try to get them all done in time, because otherwise I would have spent a week doing this. I really didn't spend a lot of time trying to make these really beautiful pictures. I didn't go through and do a lot of noise reduction, or I mostly just tried to remove gradients, and then I cropped them all to show the same scale, with exception of the four really large objects. And so when I went back and looked at M74, I realized, yes, in fact, I had gotten it. I matched up the star patterns here. You can see this little group of four stars to the lower right of the galaxy, and that in fact shows up in the real image of M74. So I had in fact gotten that. And with lots of stacking and manipulation, I was able to I found three frames that had this group of stars in it. And I went through and enhanced that as much as I possibly could. And you can see here, there's two lines of parallel lines of stars here. And in fact, I did get M30 there. So you can see the little blob there at the end of the bottom row of stars. So I did in fact get M30. So I actually was able to get all 110 Messier objects on my very first attempt. And I became, when I submitted this to the Messier database, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was the first person east of the Mississippi River ever to image all 110 of these objects in one night. And on my first attempt, I just consider myself extremely lucky to have been able to do that. Funny, the next night was even clearer, and the moon, of course, was not going to be as intense the next night. And I thought, should I go out and try to do it another time? And I thought, no, I think I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. And so I feel, as an amateur astronomer, I feel like, okay, well, this is something that I've actually done that I can claim is a real accomplishment. And I feel very fortunate that things worked out that did like they did. I learned an awful lot. It's funny that I'm not using a lot of that software now, but I feel like I really kind of earned my chops during that marathon. What I would learn for people who are going to go back and do something like this yourself, you've got to give yourself catch-up time. I really would. I'm glad I went through and did what I did in terms of breaking them up into groups and giving myself 15 minutes between each group, rather than trying to manage each object. That really worked out very, very well. And especially as I got ahead and had to start waiting for things to come up again, that I was able to go back and pick those off. And no matter how well you plan things, you're going to have to manually intervene. I think all of us find that out with astrophotography. Is no matter how well behaved your telescope is, you can never be 100% sure a meridian flip is going to work all the time. But I definitely sat there at my screen the whole night. I didn't get up and let the scope do its thing. I never walked away from it for more than 3 or 4 minutes at a time, as I made sure and verified that every single object was being imaged. I'm glad I had that real-time way to verify what the objects look like by having the Wikipedia thing in front of me, so that I could see what they looked like. I needed to allow myself more time for objects to rise, so I probably would go back and do them in a slightly different order next time, just to make sure that I give them time for them to come up. The things in the southeast seemed to rise a lot slower than I thought they would. It seemed like I was seeing Scorpius just hang there to the south of me all night. It felt like all night long, even though it was only the last 3 or 4 hours, I guess, because I was getting kind of tired by that time of the night. But it felt like Scorpius was just sitting there, and I was waiting for Sagittarius to come up and present itself. And of course, document and share things. I've been really glad to be able to go off and do this presentation to other folks who are interested in trying to do something like this. I don't think I had anything special about me or my process, other than I got a lot more organized than I might normally do. And it was a good way to test things out. And I was just extremely fortunate that everything worked as well as it did. Again, fantastic learning experience for me. I feel like I have much more better bonded with my scope after a result of having done this. And so this is the hero sheet here. This is all 110 objects as taken during that one night in 2019. Okay, and with that, I will end my talk and be glad to answer questions.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible that you could, like especially like 74 is hard to get in the beginning, and 30 is really hard to get.
So yeah, I feel extremely fortunate that I got to those two. Again, I think I would have been. I think they say a lot of people will be happy if they get 100 of them in one evening, and I definitely felt like I had really put the icing on the cake with those two.
Yeah, those are the two I missed visually
Hmm.
out at Howell Woods.
I could see why you would.
The M30, I mean, I,
Yeah.
I had the telescope lined up on it, and we had another big daub there, and I walked over there trying to see it, and it's really hard to pull out visually.
That's actually why I got into astrophotography in the last 6 or 7 years ago. As my eyes are just not getting to be good enough to pick out these faint fuzzies from at least from a suburban environment anymore.
Yes, that's actually really amazing.
I think I do a bit of astrophotography, and if I get it right more than about a third of the time, I'm lucky. And you get it right 100% of the time there.
Yeah, I understand that feeling. I was running a on Valentine's Day. I thought, okay, well, even though it was a clear night, I'm not going to go out into the countryside with my telescope. I'll set it up in the front yard and have it do something while I'm inside with my wife. And then it came outside just before the meridian flip, and I found out that the camera was up against the leg of the tripod, and it had basically just been uh, stalled there for 15 minutes, pointed directly overhead, and
Yeah.
like that's the kind of thing that usually happens.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. All kinds of little things like that get you. That's pretty amazing. You did say that you did have to move it at one point, right? Like what, when you moved it, was that when we were getting M30?
No, that well, actually, I had moved it when I was initially. I had taken those pictures at the very beginning that showed where my sight lines were,
Right.
and so that was the spot I was going to set up. And then as I was starting to put the tripod down at the beginning of the evening, I realized that it was on a little bit of a slope, so I moved the tripod 10 feet south. So it was before I even set up that I had set myself up to be in the trees, and didn't realize it until I was just before dawn, and I didn't want to try to again try to realign everything in the last minutes.
Oh, yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah.
Do you think in the last 5 years, using something like Nina, that you'd get a much easier hit on this?
I think I would. It's an interesting question, is whether I would go back and try it again. It's one of those things. Do you quit while you're ahead, or I have found Nina has been to be so much more flexible than Sequence Generator Pro was. Again, maybe just because I also have the benefit of having more experience with me now too. But then I've added a bunch of other stuff to my telescope, like autofocusers and things like that. So
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and disable a lot of that.
That's an impressive accomplishment.
Thank you.
A lot of planning, good execution.
Yeah, again, I think just lucky, but no, there's lots of good resources out there, and I just think it's one of those things you're never going to find out until you try it yourself, what works and what doesn't. But I tried to strip it down to the bare bones and not get too fancy with it.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys have good luck with your marathon next month.
I hope so. I hope the weather's going to be nice. That's really the magic.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's a dark sky site with pretty good horizons. I think it's got a good western horizon. The trick is going to be where you set up to catch that M30 in those last few in the east. Because there's one tall tree in the east, right around 90 degrees. So I think that's going to be the tricky bit. Yeah, so I'd recommend anybody that's thinking about doing it. It's a lot of fun, by the way. Anybody thinking about doing it, you pull down. I think I put it on the website. If not, I'll put it on the website. We have I've got the horizons for Hampton that you can put in Stellarium. Right, and so it's based on. I went out and took all these detailed measurements of the horizon from the center of the field. So you can use that for some of your planning. I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea if you can get the. I think you can probably get the first two, 77 and 74. But I have no idea if you can get the M30. So I probably should have looked it up before I got on the call here today, but I didn't think about it. So
I have a logistical question about Hampton. I drove out there for the first time last week and found it to be kind of daunting, and imagining it at 8 p.m. driving out. Where do you guys go to set up your telescopes? Do you go by the plantation house? Where do you go?
no. So when you drive in, you basically when you drive in, you drive into the building. You drive into the park, and it ends in that parking lot with a split rail fence.
Yeah.
So right before you get to that parking lot, there's a big open field, and so we actually you can actually pull out onto that field.
Okay.
And we can observe. They mow it before we come out.
Okay.
And it's good because you're off the beaten path. But in addition, that both the rangers out there actually live on site, those two houses. So they're there 24/7. They usually at least one of them comes out when we're out there. So, and of course there's restrooms out there as well because they leave those open. So, but yeah, it's actually not too bad to get out there. The ground's pretty the open field part's pretty firm. You just don't want to drive into the tall grass, right? But you can just we basically just kind of line up our cars and set up and observe.
Is there any value to coming if you're just a complete beginner and you don't have a scope, or is it really just for people who are experienced?
No, absolutely. We have visitors that come out there all the time who don't have telescopes and just want to look through. And there are plenty of people that are doing visual observing. They'll let you look through their scopes. We do have some imagers, and a lot of times they'll let you look at what's on the screen. So, but no, it's actually an excellent way to learn about how everything works. So,
okay.
Generally, I tell people, astronomers are always willing to let people look through their scopes. Unless you see somebody, the only thing is you should say if you see somebody cursing and kicking their scope or complaining, then they're probably having a bad day. So you might want to just give that particular scope a pass and just, don't come over and say, what are you looking at? Right. The only thing about if people do decide to do the Messier Marathon, they might be kind of busy, right? There's like that
Right.
first. It's if you're doing it visually, there's that first burst of speed you got to put on to get those early objects, and then it kind of slows down. So just be aware, like when it first gets dark, if people are doing that Messier Marathon, they're going to be flying, right? Um, so again, it's probably not as critical with the imager because you can get it down farther into the as lower down, so it's not as even if it's washed out, right? But visually, it gets pretty hard. Those are pretty faint to see. So, but yeah, other than that, yeah, please come out. There'll be plenty of people out observing, and we'll have those visitors out there, and they're not going to have telescopes. So, but yeah, anytime.
Okay, thank you.
And the club has telescopes to borrow, so I'll bring one or both of them.
Yeah, you want to borrow one?
Huh? Yeah.
You want to borrow one?
Yeah.
I think
You want
John. Did somebody pick up the one from John or?
Yeah, I've got it. I've got both of them now.
Okay.
I freed up a spot, and so I've got the 10-inch and 8-inch for the club. So I'll bring, one or both. It depends how much I can bring. Along with my other telescope.
Okay.
It's who is that? Megan? Megan, if you've never owned one, it's a good way to find out if you really want to get one instead of investing a lot of money on a scope that you may just put in a closet so you can check out what the club has. See what you would like.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. So let's hope for good weather.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly hope. I mean, we've had a bad run of weather. Not much we can do about that. But even like I said at the opening of the meeting, and I'll say it again, even if the weather's not great, SCDNR is bringing out a bunch of people. So we will need to, it'd be great to have a couple of scopes out there to show
Yeah.
what we can see. Yeah.
Ian, what was that date again? March what?
March 10th.
Okay.
Saturday,
And
March 10th.
if you could pass that on to Low Country Stargazers, you might get a few of us up there also.
Yeah, Dimitri is already aware of it and was, I think, going to advertise it. But
Okay.
I'll talk to Dimitri again.
Okay, sounds good.
I can imagine you're probably not going to be able to see M30 on March 10th, but you never know.
Yeah, that's the hard one.
Yeah.
The good news is it'll be a little easier up front, but yeah.
Yeah.
But if you get all but one, that's still a great accomplishment.
It's
right?
absolutely.
There's very few people. We used to give away in our previous club I belonged to, we gave away certificates for anybody that got over 100.
Hmm.
So, because that's a lot of work, represents quite an accomplishment. So,
Sure
yeah, if you can get, yeah, I missed 2. That was the best I've ever had, right?
Man.
Visually, but it was again, it was just really hard. I wanted to
Were you
convince
were you doing that all by finding them by hand too, not using setting circles or anything like, or
I use setting circles
with the computers or
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was
Guys, I gotta go.
okay. Tom, see you later. It wasn't a go-to scope.
Mhm.
I think it was more like it was like setting circles.
Okay.
I didn't star hop to them.
Mhm.
So that was yeah. So we gave credit for somebody who we had a special award
Man.
for people that star hopped, right?
Wow.
But I was just trying to see them all, right? And it's quite
Yeah.
the burst at the
Yeah.
beginning, doing it visually, right? Because you gotta really just, because like you gotta convince yourself you actually see it, and you kind of have to know what you're looking for. And again, it was all push to, so push to line up, and that was it was quite the burst.
Amazing.
But again, I knew I was on it at M30, and the sky, that part of the sky was clear. I had set up so I could see that part of the sky, but it just could not make it out visually.
Mm.
So that was just after staying up all night, I was like, I need this last one.
Yeah.
So, but it was, yeah, it's a lot of fun. I recommend people do it. All right. For anybody watching the live stream, thanks for joining us. I'm going to stop the live